Hello, everyone. Welcome to Lincoln Yards, and welcome from around the world streaming here. My name is Keating Crown, Managing Principal at Sterling Bay, and also a founding trustee of the 9/11 Memorial and Museum. So thank you all for taking the time to be here and for tuning in. I think it's going to be a great program. First, I'd like to thank my co-trustee at the Memorial, Richard Edelman. Thank you, Richard. I was very fortunate to survive on September 11th. I was on the 100th floor of the South Tower, the second tower, when the first tower was hit. I was able to make my way to the 78th floor of the South Tower, at which point 78th floor is a transfer floor. There were over 200 people on the floor, at which point the South Tower was hit, and it was hit from 78 through 84. I was fortunate to be able to make my way to the only stairwell out of 3 that survived the impact. You may have heard of a gentleman named Wells Crowther, the man with the red bandana. I believe that he opened the stairwell door that I was able to get to and ultimately make it out of the building. Again, very lucky. I was one of 12 of over 200 people on the 78th floor that survived on September 11th. Following that, after a few years, with the support of my family, committed to do what I could to create this lasting memorial and museum. And so I did my little part. As of today, over 70 million people from around the country and 174 countries have visited the memorial, with another 22 million visiting the museum. So I know you didn't come here to listen to me, and we'll get to the Admiral. Admiral, my 12-year-old, did say that she made her bed this morning. But first, I'd like to introduce Beth Hillman, the President and CEO of the 9/11 Memorial Museum.
Thank you, Keating, for that introduction, which reminds us why we're all here and the good fortune and the challenges that we faced that we don't always recognize in our colleagues out there. And thank you, Keating, for sponsoring this event for us in this fabulous space. I want to thank Richard Edelman as well for sponsoring this event. Keating and Richard are 2 of the trustees of the 9/11 Memorial and Museum who, when I came on board a year ago, said they would do whatever they could to help, and they have. You're going to meet another one of those trustees tonight as our featured speaker. First, I want to recognize, though, as Keating is one of our hosts, the generations of Crowns who have made a difference to the 9/11 Memorial and Museum. Grandparents, parents, other family members. We wouldn't have the Memorial and Museum without them. Likewise, Richard's family is here too. It makes a big difference. It's not only the elders in our families that care either. Keating mentioned his daughter. Georgia was with us actually last month at the 9/11 Memorial and Museum benefit dinner. She celebrated her birthday with us. I don't know if that was her choice, Keating, or yours. She's one of the more than 100 million Americans born since 9/11. And for us to be able to reach those people who can't have a lived memory of 9/11 is a part of what we have to do into the future. 9/11 and 9/11 stories are a time when we can learn how brightness can come out of some of the darkest of days. People like Wells Crowther that Keating talked about, people like Keating. One of those darkest days was October 7th, 2023. It's also up to us as a museum to take advantage of the opportunity, terrible as it is, to help bring context and perspective to these very difficult subjects at hand. We also feel an obligation to help share the consequences of terrorism and the responses that it can elicit, which can bring unity, can demonstrate courage, and can bring people together again. So tonight, I'm grateful for the opportunity to bring another of our 9/11 Memorial and trustees here. Admiral William H. McRaven is an extraordinary leader across the public and private sector. He's a renowned speaker. He's a best-selling author, and he's been an inspiration to many of us. And this evening, he's going to be in conversation with Mr. Clifford Chanin, who is our museum director. Please join me in welcoming Admiral Bill McRaven.
Good evening, Admiral. Good evening, everybody. Richard Keating, thank you very much. All our friends back home or around the world watching. We will get into it quickly because there is a lot to talk about, and the issues change literally by the minute. Admiral, the reporting is that after the very intensive series of bombardments, which continue, which have been reported on extensively, the Israelis have moved ground forces into Gaza at different points. And there's not that much reporting from the ground at this point, so exactly what's happening is not clear. But I wonder, we've talked a lot about the risks of urban combat, the underground tunnel structure, the hostages that are being held. Tell us, if you would, what you see when you are reading this reporting, and with what understanding do you look at the challenges that are faced in terms of the Israeli strategy, what they're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, well, thanks, Cliff. And again, thanks to Beth and all those that are hosting, that are joining us tonight as well. I'm going to talk about this kind of in kind of military context. Obviously, the Israelis now, as they begin to push in, and as I've been kind of reading the open source material, they're about 2 miles into Gaza. And when you think about Gaza, it is kind of roughly twice the size of Manhattan, and yet just as dense. So if you can visualize kind of making your way through Manhattan, you will find that there are a lot of areas that are channelized. So a lot of, once they begin to get into Gaza City, once they begin to have to really fight in terms of the urban aspect of this, the enemy generally has the upper hand in terms of they know the terrain. They can have, there's multiple points where they can engage the Israelis coming in. Everything about urban warfare is incredibly difficult. It's difficult because you don't know who the enemy is, you don't know where the enemy is, and they can come at you from multiple directions, and you invariably get, again, channelized down the streets, down the alleys, et cetera. So the nature of the fight will be difficult. But in today's environment, of course, they have the advantage of good situational awareness in terms of there will be drones overhead that will be able to provide the guys on the ground with an understanding of where they are in terms of the urban terrain. That is always helpful. But nonetheless, you have to assume that Hamas expected this incursion. So there will be areas that I would assume there are going to be minefields, there will be IEDs, there will be a lot of barriers that will put the Israelis in a position where they will once again be channelized into an area where Hamas is waiting for them. So it's complicated, it's hard. There'll be a heavy losses, I think, on both sides. And then as you add the hostages to this equation, it makes it doubly difficult because you're talking about 200 plus hostages, and having rescued and tried to rescue hostages before. If you've got 200 hostages and they are spread, again, if you're thinking about it from a military context, if you're Hamas, you're going to spread those hostages out across the depth and the breadth of Gaza. You do this so that one raid can't rescue them all. We have seen, obviously, pictures where they have co-located 2 or 3 hostages together, but my expectation would be these are small groups of hostages throughout Gaza, which means that one of their commando units is not going to be able to go in and obviously rescue all of them. And once you conduct one rescue operation, now the enemy understands how you're going about that, and therefore they'll be prepared next time to defend against it. So, and again, I don't think this is anything that surprises anybody that has been in combat before. I know the American advisors that are on the ground there that are talking to the Israelis, those of us that spent time fighting in Ramadi or parts of Kabul. Again, you're trying to advise the Israelis about the complicated nature of this. They understand that as military officers enlisted, but until you're in there fighting it, it's a little hard to appreciate it.
Let's talk a little bit about the air element, because that's what started all of this. And the euphemism is preparing the battlefield. Right. What does that actually mean, and is it effective? Yeah,
so when you think about the air strikes, so yeah, as we say, you're prepping the battlefield, which means you're going to try to take out the communications nodes, the infrastructure that might be supporting Hamas. So with the expectation that the Israelis have figured out to some degree across Gaza where some of these nodes are, this is what they're targeting. Of course, with Hamas, they are using human shields, and this is, once again, it complicates the job for the Israelis. You can't just arbitrarily strike a building that you think might be a Hamas control or command and control node if there are 200 civilians in that building. So, but this is the way terrorist organizations work. They're going to hide within the civilian population, making it difficult to do this. So they are not only preparing the battlefield, taking out the communications nodes, taking out the supply depots, taking out where they might think that there are arms and ammunition, but they are also striking where they think there might be Hamas leaders. So you're also taking out the leadership. And they have had a number of successful strikes against some of the Hamas leaders. So all this is part of the preparation of the battlefield.
Let's talk about the civilians and their role. You have commanded troops. You've been in situations where you have a military objective, that there are civilians involved. There are laws of war, although they are not always strictly observed. David French in the New York Times, who was a military lawyer in Iraq, talked about these laws of war, and it doesn't mean that there are not going to be civilian casualties. It just means you're supposed to try to minimize them. But as you describe, since the deliberate strategy seems to be to use civilians as shields, it makes it extraordinarily difficult. Can you take us into the mind of a commanding officer who is sending troops into these situations? How do you prepare them? What are the limits on what they can do? Are you worried about the kind of reprisals that may seem natural in light of what happened on October 7th?
Yeah, so to begin with, what I've seen the administration doing, which I think is absolutely the right approach to this, is they've been talking to Netanyahu, they've been talking to the Israeli leadership to say, we understand, we are fully behind you, you have the right to self-defense, we support you going after Hamas, but as you said, Cliff, there are the law of armed conflict, and the law of armed conflict is pretty clear when it comes to civilians. You want to do everything you can to minimize civilian casualties. That is the nature of belligerents, whether they are state actors or not. I mean, we went after al-Qaeda, we went after the Taliban, but every time you're preparing to take an airstrike, you had to look at and you had to understand the collateral damage assessment and determine whether or not there were civilians there. And if you know that there are civilians there, innocent civilians, that are going to be killed as a result of your airstrike, then there's a deliberative process you have to go through. If you think that the bad guys are using these civilians as shields, but then you realize the value of the leadership you're going after is important enough to take this strike, that is the complex decision the commanders have to make. Sometimes it is a legal decision, sometimes it is a moral decision, but it is always a difficult decision to make. Nobody wants to kill civilians on the battlefield, innocent civilians on the battlefield. But sometimes it is hard to parse that in light of the fact that you're trying to save civilians in a strange way by attacking Hamas leadership. The one thing that you always know, when we talk about rules of engagement and the law of armed conflict, there are two kind of overarching rules that apply. One, you always have the right of self-defense. So every soldier in the American military, he or she knows going into battle, you always have the right of self-defense. If somebody threatens you, you have the right to defend yourself. As a commander, you have the responsibility for unit defense. So once again, if you are a commander of a unit in combat and you fail to protect your unit against a threat, you can be held accountable as a commander because you failed to protect your unit, and that's your responsibility. So if you broaden those rules of engagement, you broaden those laws out to thinking of it in the context of a nation absolutely has the right of self-defense. And a nation and a commander or a leader of that nation has the responsibility to protect their nation. Those two laws and those two rules of engagement kind of trump everything else when you are in combat. But make no mistake about it, the law of armed conflict is pretty clear when it comes to innocent civilians. You will take every step possible to prevent civilian casualties.
You were in situations, and we're seeing this now live on the air, the reporting from these devastated scenes in Gaza. The media, and social media in particular, is now a much different factor, even than it was at the peak of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. But still, you had to face that, and you had to count that in as part of your calculation of what the impact of these kinds of attacks would be. How is this now a factor that affects what's going to happen?
Yeah, my hope here is that what the Israelis are doing are looking at this in a strategic context. So what is their end game? What do they want their end game to be? Prime Minister Netanyahu has talked about this destroying Hamas. I can tell you from trying to destroy terrorist organizations, that's almost impossible to do. Hamas is not just about people, it is about an ideology, and it's very difficult to destroy an ideology. Can you defeat Hamas to the point where they are no longer a viable entity in Gaza that rules Gaza, that threatens Israel? That may be a strategy worth, or that may be a strategic goal that you can't accomplish. Destroying it, I think that is maybe a bridge too far for them. But where do they want to be at the end of this? Part of their concern is, of course, going to have to be, do you want to fight on multiple fronts? So if they continue to push far into Gaza, and then you find that now you are fighting Hezbollah to the north, the Palestinians in the West Bank, maybe Iran, now you're going to be fighting on multiple fronts. Once again, is that strategically what you want to do? I think the answer is probably no. So now how do you go about kind of squaring the circle? Well, I think you continue the airstrikes if they are surgical and very precise airstrikes. Can you send in commandos or limited strikes to take out Hamas leadership? Once again, you can. It's challenging. And make no mistake about it, there will be casualties on the part of the Israelis when they do this. Is that going to be sufficient to defeat Hamas? It may not be. You also have 200 plus hostages out there. So what is your strategic calculations vis-a-vis those hostages? You may not, and you probably will not be able to save all those hostages. What is their calculus in terms of how much are they prepared to sacrifice in order to destroy Hamas? As I said before, nothing about this is easy. I teach a class at the University of Texas at Austin, graduate class, and it is on national security decision making. And the first class, I set the scenario up, and they role play. So somebody's the president, somebody's Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, et cetera. And I set up a scenario, and I've had it now for 5 years, where they're going after the leader of al-Qaeda in Pakistan. And we have found the leader of al-Qaeda in Pakistan, and we know that he is about to authorize an attack on Americans with one phone call. And so we're in a position to conduct a drone strike to kill this guy. And we've done the collateral damage assessment, and we have made the decision that this Hellfire missile will be able to go through this window, kill the bad guy, and not kill any of the innocent women and children that are in the building. And so I set this scenario up for the class, and I give them about an hour to debate it. And of course, at the end of the debate, they're just about to make the decision. I say, oh, I'm sorry. This airstrike is going to kill 2 women and 2 children. Now do you want to do it? And they go, no, we don't want to do it. I said, well, then Americans are going to die. Now what do you want to do? This is the dilemma. This is the reality of these decisions. There's no black and white. There's no easy way out of this. And the nature of national security decision-making comes back, I think, and I would always tell them, whoever was acting in the role of the commander-in-chief of the president, I said, your number one responsibility as the president of the United States is to protect American lives and interests. That's your number one responsibility. So how does the Israeli leadership view their responsibility at this point in time? I think we've seen how they view it.
Let me ask, we talked a little bit about, of course, the challenges of urban warfare. The whole tunnel system obviously is a part of that. Can this be damaged with the air raids? Is this even more, it's obviously a much more complicating factor. How do you assess that as an added piece of this?
So it absolutely can. Again, a lot of tunnels out there, depending upon the depth of the tunnels, but back to the preparation of the battlefield. So these tunnels, of course, are well lit. There's electricity coming into the tunnels. There are ways to move from point A to point B. So certainly the tunnels can be damaged. Can they all be destroyed with airstrikes? I don't know exactly where the tunnels are, so I'd be reluctant to say you could take out all the tunnels. But if a tunnel is hit with a bunker buster bomb or with a precise weapon, depending upon where the power to those tunnels are, you can certainly damage the tunnels enough that they're not of use.
Let's talk also about the time length for this. This is not something that you're going to rush into.
Right.
This is something that you're going to have to move carefully because there are going to be casualties anyway, but you want to minimize certainly your own. Do you have any sense of if other factors are not involved, the international community, openings on other fronts, simply in terms of the challenge that Israel faces today in Gaza. Do you have a sense of how long it could take them to reach some reasonable approximation of their goals, assuming they could do that?
No. But here's why. I don't think you can dismiss the factors that you wanted to dismiss. If you're talking about tanks rolling through Gaza City, you think how long did it take the Americans and our allies to clear Mosul? It took 9 months for us to clear Mosul. And we had pretty good freedom in Mosul. And I would say that the Al-Qaeda in Iraq and ISIS and others that were in Mosul were not near as capable as Hamas is and what Hamas is probably prepared. So, but once again, I don't think you can look at it in isolation. Now again, Netanyahu's come out today and said, we're not going to have a ceasefire. And the Biden administration said, we understand that and respect that. But once again, they've made it clear that if you do that, you still need to follow the law of armed conflict. So we'll see how much pressure the international community has on this. I think you need to look at that. You need to watch the Arab Street. There have obviously been protests across the Arab world on this, and see how that affects, once again, how far they push in, the amount of damage that occurs, the number of innocent Palestinians that are killed. I think this will all weigh on the potential for the West Bank and for Hezbollah to get involved.
Well, let's talk about the prospect for an expansion of a multi-front war. The Iranian foreign minister a couple of weeks ago was rather aggressive in his statements. He seems to have walked them back. He's not necessarily the judge of what's going to happen, but still, there did seem to be some pullback in terms of what he was talking about. There's been all kinds of speculation that Hezbollah does not, at least at this point, want to be dragged into this. Please assess for us what you think. The risks are obvious, but what are the chances that this can be confined? Or do you think this is pulling towards a multi-front engagement?
Yeah, if I had a crystal ball, it probably wouldn't be very clear. But what I do know from spending a lot of time in the area is that the Iranians do not want to go to war with us. And you think back, we've been having various low-level conflicts with the Iranians for a long time. You think back in let's see, in 1989, the USS Vincennes shot down an Iranian Airbus and killed 289 innocent Iranians, and we didn't go to war with Iran. Iran mined the Persian Gulf, and one of our ships, the USS Samuel B. Roberts, got hit by a mine, almost sunk. We didn't go to war with Iran. We know how to manage the conflict on the edges with the Iranians. And again, the Iranians are smart enough, I think, to understand that they do not want to go to war with the United States. They would prefer not to be put in that position. They may find themselves dragged into this if their proxies continue to strike U.S. targets. And we know that the Shia militias and the Iranian proxies in Syria and in Iraq have taken shots at some of our U.S. bases out there, and we have responded. Hezbollah, once again, I don't think Hezbollah wants to find themselves in a fight with the Israelis. They've done that before and it hasn't turned out well for them. And I think the Israelis are probably prepared to fight on multiple fronts. My sense of things is right now that it is manageable. It is possible to contain it, but I will put a lot of caveats behind that. And a lot of those caveats have to do with the degree of civilian casualties that are likely to occur the further the Israelis push into Gaza, the depth of the humanitarian crisis, and if they can't begin to get supplies, humanitarian aid through the Rafah Gate, I think this presents a lot of problems. So, we need, if Hamas is serious about protecting the Palestinian people in Gaza, then they need to figure out a way to get the Rafah Gate open, to get the supplies coming in from Egypt. A lot of that will, I think, determine the direction that this goes.
You know, you mentioned Iran not wanting to fight the United States, which kind of slips in the possibility that we are going to become involved. The president has sent 2 carrier groups in there. That is a very strong statement. And yet we seem also to be positioned in a way that it could happen that we were to get involved. I think the reporting has been anyway that the U.S. has told Israel, don't you start with them, but if they start with you, we will be there. Is that your understanding of it? And yet, and if so, what do you see our role could be in these kinds of circumstances?
Well, it depends on the nature of the strike. So, you know, if the Iranians, as a state actor, engage Israel with, ballistic missiles of some sort, yeah, then we could find ourselves certainly going after the launch sites. Once again, the American military and the national security apparatus with the United States is pretty good about containing kind of conflict escalation. There is always a concern about you don't want the conflict to escalate. You don't want to get to the point where you can't manage the conflict. So a lot of times we look at a measured response. So if Iran was to do something towards Israel, if Israel didn't strike back, then maybe we would be in a position once again to do a measured response against a particular set of targets. Not all of a sudden some invasion into Iran, not taking out Bandar Abbas or Bashir or any of that sort of stuff, but finding a measured response. This is essentially what we did when the Iranian proxies struck American sites in Syria and Iraq. We had what we considered a measured response. This generally allows for both sides not to begin the escalation. But that doesn't mean these aren't dangerous times. If any sort of missile were to hit and kill American sailors on a ship, if the IRGC Quds Force, their Special Operations Force, was to do something significant against an allied target, if the Iranian Navy were to, attack a vessel in the Persian Gulf, all of this then makes it very difficult for us not to respond in a more aggressive fashion. And then you begin to see the cycle of violence escalate.
It does appear that simply by the presence of U.S. forces at that level and the president's statements that he is not taking that off the table as a possibility.
No, and that is how deterrence works. When you sail 2 carrier battle groups, into the Mediterranean or, one into the Persian Gulf or something, that's a pretty strong signal. You're talking about, 6,000 sailors, 90 aircraft. That's an incredible amount of firepower. And it's not just about the aircraft carrier. It's flying, the Stars and Stripes. And that means that the might of the American military is behind it. And again, no nation wants to find itself tangling with us. So yeah, it is a strong deterrent, and that deterrent, physical deterrent, has got to be backed up by words, which again the president has done.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the aftermath of this, and we don't know when it's going to come or what it's going to look like. But Daniel Kurtzer was the American ambassador in Israel during the war at the beginning of the war in Iraq. He wrote in Haaretz saying that at the time, Israeli assessments of the situation provided warnings that they offered to the United States of don't occupy this place for a long time. Don't try to set up democracy. That's not what you're going to get there. That was not the advice that was followed, and we saw what happened. But he says now that this is the advice that Americans are offering Israel, that whatever your expectations are, you're not going to transform the society. Something is going to be left there as a problem to deal with in terms of settling this issue in relation to the Palestinians. Do you see that as lessons well learned in the sense of our experience in Iraq and what we're bringing to the Israelis by way of advice?
Yeah, I wouldn't even begin to try to advise the Israelis on how to handle the situation in their neighborhood. I think that is, they've got to work their way through that. I don't have the context in terms of, I don't live that. I intellectually, I understand all the issues. I read all about it. I listen to everything that's being said, but I think it's like anything else. Unless you're there, unless you've lived it, unless you can smell it, unless you can taste it, you better be careful about offering advice to people. And this is why when people ask me about, well, what's it like to fight in an urban environment? Well, I can tell you exactly what it's like. I mean, I can smell it, I can taste it, I can feel it. It resonates with me emotionally. So as an American, sitting here, I would be very reluctant to offer any advice on how best to handle that very, very complicated situation. I think what we need to continue to do is we need to continue to provide the Israelis the moral support, the military support they need, while at the same time, again, while at the same time, as the administration has done, saying, yes, but it is very important that you follow the law of armed conflict between belligerents. Whether you think Hamas is a legitimate belligerent or not, you need to take that into consideration. Because if you don't, one of the things I do know, and one of the things that I worked very hard to do when I was overseas, is to make sure that the young soldiers do follow the rules of engagement, that they do follow the law of armed conflict, because if they fail to, if you as a commander fail to hold them accountable, not only have you failed in your job, they've got to live with that afterwards. And when you're 18, 19 years old, sometimes you're like, oh, okay, I got it. But let me tell you, when you're 40 and 50 and 60 and 70, that stuff comes back to haunt you because you say, could I have done something different to have protected innocent civilians? So you don't want to put the young soldiers in a position where they are taking innocent lives. By the same token, you need to give them the latitude to do their job to defeat Hamas and however best they can in the situation that they're in.
Let me ask and take you inside your command role again, because we're watching what's happening here, and the amount of waiting is agonizing, I'm sure, and the sense of uncertainty, whether or not it's on the Israeli side or the Hamas side, has got to be enormous. From your perspective, in terms of sending people into these situations, observing them from above, if you will, right, what goes through the mind of a commander as the battle is not yet fully joined, and all these factors are still mysteries?
Yeah, the interesting thing is, 20 years of fighting a war, having watched it every single night, you get to the point where you have a lot of confidence in your soldiers on the ground. So if I can kind of describe my setup. So when I was in Iraq or Afghanistan, either one of them, I had a command center that was probably twice the size of this room. And on the screen here were maybe 50 flat panel displays with drones showing every unit that I had out in the battlefield. And I could watch the helicopters coming in. I could watch the guys on the ground. They have Blue Force trackers. I know where everybody is. I've got in that room, by the way, I've probably got 150 to 175 people that are managing the medevac plan, that are managing the communications, that are managing the Blue Force trackers, that are managing the drones. They're managing every aspect of this. And you're watching the guys on the ground. Then they get into a firefight. And you're like, okay, they're in a firefight. You have to listen to them on the radio, because what you see on the screen can scare the hell out of you. And yet, the young soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan who had been in a lot of firefights, they knew how to deal with the firefights. You're sitting back there and, it is the worst position to be in, because you're in the rear doing everything you can to help them, and they're on the ground and you feel helpless. But you also know that because, at least in the case of my soldiers, having done this hundreds or thousands of times, they could be in a firefight and be reasonably comfortable in that firefight. It's kind of hard to equate that you're seeing guys on the ground with rounds going back and forth, and yet you listen to them on the radio and they're like, okay, we're in a firefight, but hey, we're calling artillery, and it's when all of a sudden they get ambushed and the situation is not what you expected, and you hear the panic in their voice. You have a limited number of assets that you can bring to bear. So maybe you have a combat air patrol overhead, maybe you have artillery on call, maybe you have all these things, but you still can't save them from being ambushed by the enemy. But let me go back just a little bit, because the one thing that saves you from a lot of the problems here is the planning and preparation. So when you take a look at what the Israelis are doing now, you say, why did it take so long? The answer is because back to the nature of urban warfare, they are probably looking at every building in Gaza City. They want to know where every building is. They want to know how many stories are in that building. They want to know how many people are in that building. They want to know what the alleyways look like in that building. They want to know if there's communications networks on top of that building. They want to know everything about those buildings that they can. And my guess is they have built some sort of, as we used to say, sand table, but think of it as a map on the ground, and they may have models. They may have a lot of that sort of stuff that allows them to know exactly and plan exactly what their routes are going to be, or if this route's blocked off, where do we go from here? That's all part of the planning and preparation phase that will make combat, it's never safer, but it will make it a little bit more manageable when you get into a firefight and you say, well, plan A isn't working. That's all right. I planned for plan B and plan C and plan D. So all of this prep work they're doing, this puts them in a much better position to be successful as they go in, rather than, 2 days after the Hamas attack, deciding that they're going to storm into Gaza. That would not have served them well.
Let me expand out because we're running a little low on time.
Sure.
The strategic possibilities coming out of this, watching our antagonists around the world, watching what is going on, how we are involved or not involved, whether we are keeping commitments or not. You think of the situation in Ukraine with the Russians.
Yep.
The Chinese must be watching this with Taiwan in the back of their mind. Can you put these pieces together for us in terms of the stakes of the U.S. in the Middle East, but expanding outward to these other dimensions?
Yeah, so, there's a lot of people out there that worry that, oh my gosh, we've got a lot going on in the world. We do have a lot going on in the world. Between Russia and Ukraine, just as you said, Cliff, between Russia and Ukraine, what's going on in Israel, and then always concerns about China and the South China Sea. But our institutions are what allow us to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. So the fact of the matter is, if you think about the President's national security team, let's think about the Department of Defense first. So in the Department of Defense, you have combatant commanders, geographic combatant commanders. So in the Pacific region, you have a Navy 4-star admiral, and he's got a huge staff, and he's got a huge amount of support, and he is worried about China. He's not worried about what's going on in Israel, right? Then you've got General Eric Kurilla down at CENTCOM. He is the CENTCOM commander. He is worried about Israel. Then you have General Cavoli. He's the EUCOM commander. He's worried about Ukraine. They all have their geographic alignments. So does the State Department. So does CIA. So they are all aligned, and their job is to be able to provide the National Security Council staff and the President of the United States their best military advice on how to deal with this. So it's not as though the President or Jake Sullivan or Tony Blinken or even Lloyd Austin that they've got to sit there all day long and worry about it. They've got great staffs and great young men and women that are working these issues for them, providing them kind of, hey, here's where we need to go best. Now, again, it is synchronized in the interagency process that is providing the best advice to the President. What I think the President has done pretty well here is he's been, I think, very strong on support for Israel. He's been very strong on support for Ukraine. And I think that is telling the world that the United States leadership does believe in making sure that we're supporting representative governments, that we are against autocrats, that we are against terrorism, that we're going to stand by our allies. And that is an incredibly important message to send at this point in time.
You mentioned the combatant commanders and their responsibilities. And yet, it may be a digression, but I can't help but think, given the importance of these roles, what's going on in the Congress, and the hold that one senator has put on many of these appointments.
Right.
What impact does that have on our preparation and our ability to do what needs to be done with the decision-making that we need to have?
Well, it means that the next crop of combatant commanders and senior leaders in the military are being kind of held in abeyance. It affects morale as much as it does the capability and the competence, because just like anybody else, they've got families, they've got to move them for schools, and now because they didn't get promoted on time, the kids are out of the school cycle. They're not moving them because the money's not being made available for them to move because they haven't been promoted. So it is this incredible trickle-down effect across the entire Department of Defense. Does it mean that we are any less capable because those people have not risen up to the new ranks? I think we're perfectly fine, because the men and women that are sitting in the seats right now, yes, they're being extended, or there's an acting person in there, but they're all very capable.
Let me change a little bit the subject and go back to your experience as Chancellor of the University of Texas. one of these extraordinary things in terms of the reaction to October 7th was what has happened on college campuses across the country. It's hard to understand, and yet it's happening enough that it's a real thing. What can you tell us about this from your perspective, having run a major state university system?
Well, one, academic freedom is kind of the foundation of all great universities. And so you have to be in a position to ensure that there is a level of academic freedom, that there is a level of free speech, that there is not a level of hate speech. And again, on all campuses, and Beth knows this well, there are very clear criteria for what constitutes hate speech, but also what constitutes freedom of speech. The issue for the presidents of these universities now is trying to signal their position in terms of a university's position on the Israeli-Hamas conflict. Yeah, I had the opportunity to talk to a number of university presidents about this, and interestingly enough, a few of them, as you know, did not handle it well. But the ones that handled it well recognize that, look, this is about the safety of our students and our community. So if you put out a message that reinforces the safety of the community and the safety of the students, then you're probably going to be okay. If you decide that you are going to take sides, however you try to parse that, it becomes problematic for a lot of the universities because people have very strong emotions on both sides.
One final question, and you've written, since leaving the military, many bestsellers, but which describe the lessons you've taken from it, your own experiences. You did write a book in 1995 which set the path for your successes in the military. It's called Special Ops, Case Studies in Special Operations Warfare, and it is sort of the Bible of how you fight these kinds of things, and Admiral McRaven has exemplified this with his colleagues over the years. But
that's one of 5 copies, by the way, I think it's
it may not be a bestseller, but it should be a bestseller. In it, you break down the success, why special operations succeed, and we won't have the time to go through all of it, but you really highlight, and I think it applies across the board within the military, the moral factors involved, the sense of purpose that military people bring to the assignments that they have. And I wonder, we're hearing all kinds of reports from Israel, for example, of more people going back as reservists than they expected. And, I wonder how you see sort of the moral purpose issues as they arise in what is a terrible conflict that is going to be extremely brutal for all involved.
Well, I mean, as we're sitting here doing this 9/11 Memorial Museum event, you have to make the direct relationship. You think about, after 9/11, how many young men and women signed up for the U.S. military or to go into the intelligence services or something. It was phenomenal. And I always I'm always asked, as an old guy sometimes, and when I was the chancellor at the University of Texas System, invariably when I was doing a donor event or something with the alumni, somebody would stand up and say, well, what do you think about these young kids, these millennials and these Gen Zs? You came from the military and you just told them what to do and they did it. I said, well, one, if you think when you were in the military you just told people what to do and they did it, you never served a day in the military. It's not the way it works. I said, but let me tell you something else. I said, I am the biggest fan of the millennials and the Gen Z and now whatever the new generation is that you'll ever meet. Because, most of these young kids that I served with in the military, they came in after 9/11. They came in, they raised their hand knowing they were going to war, knowing they were going to serve their country for what they thought was an important cause, a cause for all that we stood for as Americans. And that is an incredibly powerful and inspiring, moral factor in the classic sense of the Clausewitzian moral factors that will drive people to sacrifice for a cause. So I am not surprised by the number of Israelis or people that are going back to Israel to support that. Does not surprise me at all. But also know that will apply on both sides of the line, because there are other folks that feel just as passionate about the other cause. And so that always complicates warfare. People used to always ask me, what was one of my favorite books, and it was All Quiet on the Western Front. And it's a pretty small book, but it's about a German soldier during World War I. And the first time I read it, you could have taken away the German soldier and made him an American soldier, and the book would have read just the same. So as we think about that as soldiers, as we think about the war in Russia and Ukraine, or any war that we might fight, the enemy has a different perspective than ours, and you need to understand. It's classic Sun Tzu. You better understand the enemy, know yourself, know your enemy, or you're going to have a tough time fighting any fight.
Thank you. This is really scratching the surface, as you know, but going very, very deep in a limited time. Thank you so much, Admiral, for taking your time. I want to bring to everybody's attention the museum's Summit on Security, which is coming up, which will be available, its content online. So following this evening program, you will receive an email that allows you instructions for registering for the Summit on Security for free. You'll have access to all the content. And for our friends watching online, you can join as well by registering at 911memorial.org/summit, and it'll be free for you as well. So that's the kind of programming that expands on what we've done here tonight. It's representative, if I dare say, of what the museum does on a regular basis in New York and then streaming. But this has been particularly extraordinary because of this man here. So please join me in thanking Admiral William H.